There is a reason some people become louder the more they talk, yet strangely invisible the moment they leave the room, while other people barely speak at all and somehow their presence lingers long after they are gone. Think about the last person who truly unsettled your mind. Chances are it was not because they kept explaining themselves or fought for your attention. It was because they left something unfinished inside you. They said less than expected. They revealed less than you wanted, and somehow your mind refused to let them go. Ladies and gentlemen, silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is communication in its purest form, and Carl Jung believed that what remains hidden often shapes us more deeply than what is openly revealed, because the unconscious mind is irresistibly drawn toward mystery, toward the unknown, toward everything it cannot immediately understand, and that is exactly why your silence has far more power than your words ever could. Right now there may be someone replaying your last conversation, searching for clues hidden inside your pauses, wondering why you did not react the way they expected, asking themselves what you were really thinking, and without realizing it they have become trapped not by your words but by your silence, because the human mind fears unfinished stories more than painful endings. When every answer is handed to us, curiosity dies, but when something remains unresolved, the imagination begins working overtime, filling every empty space with possibilities, fears, hopes, and fantasies, and once imagination takes over, reality slowly loses its grip. Jung understood this better than almost anyone. He believed the unconscious constantly seeks completion. Whenever something feels incomplete, the mind refuses to let it rest. It circles back again and again, searching for meaning even when none exists. This is why one moment of silence can echo louder than 1,000 explanations, because silence forces people to meet themselves. They are no longer listening to you, they are listening to their own thoughts, their own fears, their own desires reflected back at them, and that reflection is often impossible to ignore. Maybe someone criticized you expecting an argument, but you stayed calm. Maybe someone walked away believing you would chase them, but you remained where you were. Maybe someone expected you to beg, explain, defend, or prove yourself, and instead they were met with quiet dignity. At first they believed they had won, but slowly something unexpected began happening. Your silence became heavier than any speech could have been. Every day they wondered why you never reached out. Every night they imagined conversations that never happened. Every unanswered question became another thread tying their mind back to you, because people rarely obsess over what they fully understand, they obsess over what they cannot explain. This is why silence carries a strange psychological gravity. It removes certainty and replaces it with mystery, and mystery has always been one of the strongest forces inside the human psyche. Jung often explored the idea that we project our hidden emotions onto people who awaken something unresolved within us. When someone cannot read your mind, they begin writing their own story about you. They imagine your feelings, they invent your motives, they create entire conversations that never occurred, and before long they are no longer reacting to the real you, they are reacting to the version of you created inside their own unconscious. This is where silence becomes astonishingly powerful, because every person fills that silence differently. One person imagines rejection, another imagines confidence, another imagines hidden love, another imagines quiet pain. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting whatever already lives inside them, and mirrors are dangerous because people rarely see only another person, they see themselves hidden beneath the surface. Perhaps this is why the strongest people throughout history were never the loudest. They understood that constant Explanation weakens presence while calm certainty strengthens it. Imagine standing before a deep still lake. The surface barely moves yet everything around it is reflected with perfect clarity. Now imagine a river rushing violently, making endless noise, drawing attention for a moment but revealing almost nothing. The quiet lake possesses a different kind of power because stillness creates depth and depth creates fascination. The same happens within human relationships. People who constantly explain themselves often reveal every card they hold, leaving nothing for the imagination. But those who know when to remain silent leave space for the unconscious to begin its work. And once the unconscious begins working, logic quietly steps aside. This is the moment when your silence becomes unforgettable, not because you intended to manipulate anyone but because human psychology naturally seeks what feels unfinished. Every unanswered question becomes a seed. Every seed grows roots. Every root slowly wraps itself around memory until one day the person realizes they are thinking about you far more than you are thinking about them. And the most surprising part is that you never had to say another word because the loudest voice inside their life has quietly become the silence you left behind. People often believe silence is weakness because the world has taught them that the loudest voice controls the room. But Jung would have smiled at that idea because he knew the greatest forces in human life rarely announce themselves. The seed grows in silence, the wound forms in silence, the unconscious shapes destiny in silence, and the deepest transformations always begin where words can no longer reach. This brings us to the first hidden truth: your silence becomes powerful the moment it forces another person to confront themselves. Most people spend their entire lives running from their own thoughts. They distract themselves with conversations, entertainment, constant movement, endless noise, because the moment everything becomes quiet, they are left alone with the one person they cannot escape themselves. Now imagine what happens when they expected you to argue, defend yourself, explain every misunderstanding, or desperately fight for their attention, but instead you gave them nothing except silence. Suddenly there is no battle to win, no words to attack, no explanation to reject, only an empty space. And that empty space becomes unbearably loud because now every accusation they made, every assumption they believed, every insecurity they carried begins echoing back toward them. This is why silence unsettles emotionally immature people more than confrontation ever could, because confrontation allows them to focus on you while silence quietly forces them to focus on themselves, and that is a place many people have spent years trying to avoid. Jung believed every human being carries a shadow, the hidden side of the personality filled with fears, regrets, insecurities, desires, and painful truths we refuse to acknowledge. As long as life remains noisy, the shadow stays comfortably hidden, but silence removes every distraction and suddenly the shadow begins speaking. This is why someone who hurt you may appear completely confident in public yet find themselves thinking about you alone at night. When the world finally becomes quiet, they remember your face, they remember your kindness, they remember the way you walked away without trying to prove your worth, and something inside them begins asking questions they never wanted to answer. Perhaps I was wrong, perhaps I lost someone valuable, perhaps the problem was never them, perhaps it was always me. These questions are dangerous because they threaten the story the ego has been protecting for years, and the ego hates being questioned. That is why some people become angry when you remain silent. Your silence steals their control. They cannot predict you, they cannot manipulate your reactions, they cannot rewrite your reality because you refuse to participate in the drama they created. And the more they fail to understand your silence, the more significant you become inside their mind. Human beings are naturally drawn toward certainty. We want clear endings, clear answers, clear labels, but silence refuses all of that. Silence leaves the story unfinished, and unfinished stories become unforgettable. Think about books that stay with you for years. Often it is not because every mystery was solved, it is because something remained open, allowing your imagination to keep returning long after the final page. The human heart works exactly the same way. People rarely replay conversations where everything was explained perfectly. Instead, they replay the words left unsaid, the messages never answered, the goodbye that never arrived, the apology that remained trapped behind pride, because the unconscious cannot tolerate incompletion. It keeps searching for meaning, hoping that one more thought might finally unlock the answer, but every attempt only pulls the memory deeper into the mind. This is why your silence becomes stronger with time, while unnecessary words often lose their value almost immediately. There is another truth most people never realize. When you constantly explain yourself, you unknowingly teach others that your peace depends on their approval. But when you know when to remain silent, you communicate something far more powerful. You show that your identity no longer depends upon convincing anyone who you are. Confidence does not always sound like certainty. Sometimes confidence sounds like nothing at all. Because genuine strength has no urgent need to defend itself. A mountain does not argue with the wind. The ocean does not explain its depth. The stars never ask anyone to believe they exist. They simply remain exactly what they are, and in that quiet certainty they command respect without demanding attention. This is the strange paradox Jung repeatedly pointed toward. The more complete a person becomes within themselves, the less desperate they become for validation from the outside, because inner security creates outer calm, while inner emptiness constantly searches for noise to hide itself. And that is why your silence begins separating those who truly understand you from those who only understood the version of you they could control. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, people reveal who they really are. Some become curious, some become respectful, some become reflective, but others become uncomfortable because they suddenly realize they no longer have access to the emotional reactions they once depended upon. And that realization changes everything, because from this moment forward the relationship is no longer being shaped by your words, it is being shaped by the meaning they attach to your silence, and that meaning is often far more revealing about them than it ever was about you. Then comes the second truth, and this is where most people completely misunderstand silence, because they think silence is meant to punish another person. But true silence has nothing to do with punishment, it has everything to do with self-possession. There is an enormous difference between remaining silent because you want someone to chase you and remaining silent because your peace has become more valuable than another argument. One is manipulation, the other is maturity, and the human heart always feels the difference, even when it cannot explain why. Jung believed that every meaningful relationship eventually reaches a moment where both people are forced to confront who they really are beneath their masks, because no mask can survive forever. Sooner or later life removes it through disappointment, loss, rejection, failure, or love. And when that moment arrives, the people who built their identity upon appearances begin collapsing, while the people who built their identity upon inner truth become strangely calm, because they no longer need constant reassurance from the outside. This is exactly why your silence becomes unforgettable when it grows out of genuine self-respect instead of hidden resentment. Imagine someone who expected you to keep sending messages after they ignored you. They expected another apology, another explanation, another attempt to repair what they themselves had broken, but the message never came. At first they felt relief, then curiosity, then confusion, and finally Something much heavier, regret, because without your constant presence they were forced to experience the full weight of their own choices, and this is something words could never have accomplished. People rarely understand the value of what they have while it continues fighting to stay. Once something quietly accepts reality and steps away, the mind suddenly begins comparing the present with the past. They remember your patience, your honesty, your consistency. The conversations they once overlooked now appear precious. The small gestures they barely noticed now become impossible to replace because absence changes perception. The unconscious has a remarkable ability to magnify what has been lost, especially when that loss happened without hatred, without revenge, and without unnecessary drama. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who walks away peacefully because it leaves no obvious enemy to blame. If you shouted, insulted, or created chaos, they could convince themselves you were the problem, but calm silence removes that escape. Now they are left standing face to face with the possibility that they destroyed something valuable through their own actions, and that realization can haunt a person far longer than any argument ever could. This is why Jung warned that what we refuse to acknowledge inside ourselves eventually returns in another form, perhaps as anxiety, perhaps as regret, perhaps as obsession, perhaps as repeated dreams, because the unconscious always seeks balance. If guilt remains buried, it searches for expression. If love remains unspoken, it searches for memory. If truth remains ignored, it quietly shapes destiny beneath the surface. And this explains why some people return months or even years later, not always because they expect another chance, but because their own unconscious never stopped carrying the unfinished weight of your absence. While you continued growing, they remained trapped inside a conversation that had already ended in reality but never ended inside their mind. However, there is another lesson hidden beneath all of this, and it may be the most important one. Yet your silence should never become a weapon, because the moment silence is used to manipulate, it loses its quiet dignity and becomes another form of control. Jung repeatedly emphasized that genuine psychological growth requires honesty with oneself before anything else. If your silence is secretly hoping someone will suffer, then you are still emotionally attached to the outcome. But when your silence comes from acceptance, something extraordinary happens. You no longer remain silent because you expect them to change. You remain silent because you have already changed, and that difference transforms everything, because now your peace no longer depends on another person's understanding, approval, apology, or return. Your silence stops being a strategy and becomes your natural state. And strangely, this is the exact moment people begin feeling your absence most deeply, because nothing is more powerful than someone who has genuinely let go while remaining kind, and nothing is more unforgettable than a heart that chose dignity over desperation and calm over chaos. Because in a world where everyone is trying to be heard, the rare person who has learned the wisdom of silence becomes impossible to ignore. Misunderstood by those who have never experienced inner peace, they mistake it for weakness because they have only known power through noise. Yet true power has never depended on volume. The deepest oceans remain calm on the surface while carrying unimaginable depth beneath, and the strongest trees continue growing in complete silence long before anyone notices their height. Human character develops the same way. The greatest transformations happen where nobody is watching, where no applause exists, where every decision is made only between you and your conscience. And perhaps this is why the people who once underestimated you eventually begin noticing something different. They expected bitterness but found peace. They expected desperation but found dignity. They expected endless explanations but found quiet confidence. And suddenly they realize the person they believed they understood has become someone entirely different, not because you changed for them, but because you finally stopped living through their opinions and started living according to your own values. This is the freedom Jung hoped every person would eventually discover, the freedom that comes when your identity is no longer built upon praise, rejection, success, failure, love, or loss, but upon a deeper understanding of who you truly are. And while psychology can help us recognize these hidden patterns, true guidance ultimately belongs to God, because lasting peace does not come only from understanding the human mind, it comes from placing your heart in the hands of the one who created it. People may misunderstand your silence, they may invent stories about it, they may return years later carrying questions you no longer feel the need to answer, but your responsibility is not to control their thoughts. Your responsibility is to guard your own heart with wisdom, humility, patience, and faith. Because the strongest silence is never empty, it is filled with character, it is filled with self-respect, it is filled with trust that what is meant for you will never require you to abandon your dignity to obtain it. So let me leave you with one final question. If every word disappeared tomorrow, if you could no longer explain yourself, defend yourself, or convince anyone of your worth, what would your silence say about you? Because in the end, people may forget your arguments, they may forget your explanations, they may even forget the sound of your voice, but they will never forget how your quiet presence made them feel. And perhaps that has always been the greatest power of silence. It speaks directly to the soul long before words ever reach the mind. If this perspective changed the way you see yourself, share it with someone who may still be searching for peace in the noise. And if you are ready to continue exploring the hidden patterns of the human mind through the timeless ideas of Carl Jung, subscribe to Winds of Thought and join us on this journey, because the deepest truths are rarely shouted, they are discovered in the moments when everything becomes silent.